They say perfect revenge is a dish best served cold, but in my case, it was never served at all. When you drain a woman's silent sacrifices and label them with lifeless bills, you do not just break a marriage. You pull the pin on a grenade you are holding in your own hand. Listen to my story to understand that sometimes a wife's silence is not submission. It is simply the countdown of a predestined sentence. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. I want to sincerely thank you for being such a loyal audience, but unfortunately, YouTube has demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to continue operations, which means we will be forced to stop uploading new videos here in the near future, and will move our content entirely to Patreon. If you enjoyed today's story, please support us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon community, where you can listen to even more incredible, longer, and highly detailed exclusive true stories with multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can join by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Now, let us begin today's story. The story of a woman named Noelle Lynch. I am Noelle Lynch. I am 34 years old, and I work as a director of strategy at Aegis Prime Innovations, a major corporate firm right here in Seattle. Financially, I am completely independent. I make a substantial six-figure salary, more than enough to support a very comfortable lifestyle on my own. But marriage, as many women eventually discover, is rarely about the money you make. It is about the wealth you silently sacrifice to keep the peace. For 5 years, I was married to a man named Carter. He was a sales director, a man who wore his ambition like a tailored Italian suit. I was sharp, intensely driven, and pathologically calculating. To our colleagues and friends, we were the ultimate modern power couple. Yet, behind the heavy mahogany doors of our pristine, minimalist home, I was the one quietly absorbing the massive financial shock of his inflated lifestyle. I paid what I called the invisible tab. I covered the premium dry cleaning for those custom suits, the weekly deliveries of imported whole bean coffee he absolutely required to start his morning, the expensive catered lunches sent to his office to impress his upper management, and the sudden, exorbitant maintenance bills for his luxury sedan. I paid these unnamed, unacknowledged expenses silently, never asking for a single dollar in return. I did it to protect his fragile ego and to maintain the grand illusion of his unchecked, independent success. The turning point arrived on a Tuesday evening in late November. It was one of those suffocating, bone-chilling Seattle evenings where the cold rain simply does not stop beating against the window panes. I had just returned home from a grueling 10-hour shift and was standing in the kitchen, slowly unpacking heavy paper grocery bags. Under the harsh, clinical glow of the overhead lights, I felt a deep, marrow-deep exhaustion. The house was dead quiet, save for the rhythmic tapping of Carter swiping on his iPad at the marble kitchen island. A minor, seemingly trivial disagreement over finances had sparked just minutes earlier. A shared credit card statement had arrived in the mail, and a small charge for a modest $75 dinner I had with my sister had caught his critical eye. He began lecturing me on unnecessary spending, completely ignoring the hundreds of dollars I had just spent stocking the pantry with his favorite imported snacks and protein shakes. Then, it happened. He did not even bother to look up from his glowing screen. His jaw tightened, and with a tone dripping with casual, cutting malice, he delivered the words that would ultimately dismantle his entire existence. "Buy your own food," he sneered. "Stop living off me." For the past few years, a venomous comment like that would have triggered a massive storm. I would have defended myself vehemently. I would have pulled up the bank statements, presented the receipts of my endless, uncredited financial support, and perhaps even shed hot, angry tears of pure frustration. But on this specific Tuesday night, standing there holding a cold carton of almond milk, I experienced a moment of total emotional paralysis. I felt absolutely nothing. No raging anger, no crushing sorrow, no desperation to be understood. It was a sterile, brutally cold awakening. In that exact second, the exhausted, battered remnants of my love for him completely flatlined. The heart monitor of our marriage went dark. I did not scream. I did not throw the heavy carton at his head. I simply placed the milk on the top shelf of the refrigerator, closed the heavy stainless steel door with a soft, definitive click, and turned around to face him. I looked directly into his eyes, and I did not say a single word. My total, chilling silence washed over him, and I watched his tense shoulders relax slightly. He smiled a tiny, victorious smile. He mistook my silence for weak submission. He genuinely thought he had won the power struggle. That night, I lay wide awake in our California king bed. The digital clock on the nightstand shifted from 2 to 3, then to 4 in the morning. Carter snored softly beside me, tangled in the heavy duvet, completely oblivious to the destructive mechanism he had just triggered. Staring up at the dark, empty ceiling, my mind became a fortress of absolute, terrifying clarity. I was not plotting a messy argument. I was drafting a meticulous, flawless blueprint for our separation. If he wanted strict financial boundaries, I would give him an impenetrable fortress. I decided I would audit every single aspect of our shared lives. I would stop paying his invisible tab immediately. I would follow his cruel command to the absolute letter. He demanded that I stop living off me, and I was going to show him exactly what starvation looked like when I stopped funding his reality. Wednesday morning arrived crisp and sharp. At exactly 8:15, I sat at my sleek glass desk in my downtown office and initiated the financial severing. My fingers moved across the keyboard with the cold precision of a surgeon. First, I opened a new, strictly individual checking account at a completely different banking institution. Next, I redirected 100% of my six-figure salary into that new, isolated vault. Finally, I logged into our joint accounts. Over the past 5 years, I had quietly funneled thousands of dollars into those accounts to cover the vast deficits his extravagant spending created. I carefully calculated exactly 50% of the remaining balance, transferred my legal half, and completely removed my name from the overdraft protection linking to his credit cards. The invisible safety net was officially gone. My next order of business was dismantling his meticulously curated lifestyle, piece by expensive piece. I picked up my desk phone and called the luxury dry cleaning service that collected garments from our front porch every Thursday. I instructed the manager to immediately suspend all scheduled pickups and explicitly stated that the credit card on file was no longer authorized for any future charges. Then, I logged into the online portal for the exclusive artisanal coffee roaster in Portland. With one satisfying click of my mouse, I permanently canceled the $85 weekly subscription of imported single-origin espresso beans. Lastly, I emailed the upscale catering company near his corporate building. I informed them that the standing order for his premium Tuesday and Thursday executive lunches was terminated, effective immediately. That evening, I drove to the premium grocery store on my way home. I pushed my metal cart through the brightly lit aisles, purchasing only enough food to sustain one human being. I bought fresh organic salads, bottles of cold-pressed green juice, premium cuts of wild-caught salmon, and a dozen farm-fresh eggs before checking out. I made a very deliberate stop in the office supply aisle. I purchased a thick roll of blindingly bright neon pink masking tape and a thick black permanent marker. When I arrived home, the house was completely empty. Carter was out late at a networking event, rubbing elbows and drinking expensive scotch on the company dime. I unpacked my groceries onto the marble kitchen island and began my quiet, methodical work. I tore off strips of the neon pink tape. I wrote my name in bold, black capital letters on every single strip. I slapped a bright pink label on the carton of almond milk. I wrapped a piece of tape around the neck of my green juice bottles. I sealed my plastic containers of fresh salad with the neon warning. Then, I opened the cardboard egg carton. With the focused dedication of an absolute madwoman, I tore tiny squares of pink tape and individually labeled all 12 eggs. I placed my vibrant, undeniable inventory onto the middle shelf of the stainless steel refrigerator, creating a glowing monument to my new boundaries. Carter discovered my handiwork the following morning at 6:30. I was sitting at the kitchen island, quietly sipping my green tea, when he yanked open the refrigerator door to grab his usual morning protein shake. He froze in his tracks. The neon pink tape glared back at him under the harsh appliance lights. He stared at the individually labeled eggs for a long, heavy moment. Then, he let out a harsh, condescending bark of laughter. He slammed the heavy door shut and turned to look at me, shaking his head in absolute disbelief. "Are you actually serious right now?" he asked, his voice dripping with arrogant amusement. "Did you really sit here and put pink tape on a carton of eggs? This is incredibly petty. You are throwing a pathetic little tantrum." He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms over his chest, completely blind to the massive storm gathering directly over his head. He truly believed this was just a fleeting, emotional outburst that would pass in a matter of days. I placed my ceramic teacup down on the saucer. I did not glare at him. I did not raise my voice in defense. I looked at him with an expression of mild, polite confusion. I offered him a soft, completely hollow smile and gave a small shrug of my shoulders. "I am only doing exactly what you taught me," I replied evenly. "You explicitly told me to buy my own food and to stop living off you. I am simply respecting your financial boundaries." He rolled his eyes dramatically, grabbed his heavy leather briefcase from the chair, and stormed out the front door, muttering under his breath about how ridiculous women could be. By Friday, the quiet absence of my invisible labor began to manifest in his physical reality. He woke up to discover the airtight canister holding his imported espresso beans was completely empty. I watched quietly from the hallway as he aggressively shook the glass jar, expecting magical coffee dust to appear, before angrily tossing it into the sink. Later that week, he was forced to dig wildly through the back of his closet because his favorite Italian wool suits were piling up, wrinkled and unwearable, on the armchair in his bedroom. The dry cleaning fairy had mysteriously vanished. I was deeply inconvenienced, but his massive ego absolutely refused to let him acknowledge the shift. He started buying bitter burnt coffee from the drive-thru down the street and wearing slightly wrinkled dress shirts to his important morning meetings. He stubbornly refused to ask me for help. He paraded around the house with his chin held high, absolutely convinced that my little strike would crumble before the end of the month. He had no idea that my neon pink tape was not a petty tantrum. It was merely a carefully orchestrated rehearsal for his absolute destruction. 2 weeks into December, the stakes of his corporate game were dramatically elevated. His firm announced their highly anticipated Winter Executive Board retreat. This was not a casual weekend team-building exercise. It was an intense, high-stakes gathering hosted at a massive, isolated wooden chalet tucked deep into the snowy, unforgiving mountains of Aspen, Colorado, for Carter. This retreat was the ultimate battleground. The prestigious position of Vice President of Sales had just become available, and this isolated weekend was his absolute golden ticket to secure that coveted leather chair. In previous years, these critical executive events were the exact moments where my invisible labor shone the absolute brightest. Whenever Carter hosted regional managers or potential high-value clients, I would quietly transform myself into his personal, high-end concierge service. Using my own personal credit cards, I would orchestrate absolute perfection. I would hire private local chefs to prepare elaborate tasting menus. I would arrange for heavy wooden crates of premium, highly rated vintage wines to be delivered ahead of time. I would curate massive, artisanal charcuterie boards overflowing with imported truffles, aged cheeses, and expensive cured meats. I executed all of this flawlessly behind the scenes. When his senior colleagues praised the extravagant, luxurious setups, Carter would graciously accept their compliments. He would casually swirl his wine, smile his blinding corporate smile, and claim he just had a natural talent for elite hospitality. He never once mentioned my name, my effort, or my bank account. In his mind, this Aspen trip was going to be no different. The sheer arrogance of his assumption was truly breathtaking. One evening, I was sitting on the living room sofa when I overheard him on a loud phone call with his company's powerful female chief executive officer. His voice boomed with that artificial, booming confidence he strictly reserved for upper management. "Do not worry about a single thing, Sarah," he boasted loudly. pacing across the hardwood floor. My team has taken care of all the culinary and logistical arrangements for the entire weekend. I promise you an absolute five-star experience from the moment you step foot inside the cabin. We have a spectacular menu planned. By my team, he meant me, yet, after he ended that grand phone call, he did not walk into the living room to ask for my assistance. He did not ask me to review a menu. He certainly did not hand me a corporate card or transfer a single dollar into my account to cover the thousands it would inevitably cost to feed a house full of hungry, expecting executives in a remote ski resort town. He simply walked past me, dropped a freshly printed flight itinerary onto the coffee table, and casually mentioned that our flight departed early Friday morning. He operated on the blind, arrogant assumption that my absolute submission would automatically kick in, just like it did every single year prior. He firmly believed my neon pink tape was just a silly phase that had ended, and that I would obediently fall back into my role as his silent, wealthy servant to protect his precious career progression. Thursday evening, the day before our flight to Colorado, I left the house quietly and drove to a modest local supermarket. I did not visit the premium butcher shop. I did not stop by the expensive boutique wine merchant. I grabbed a small, red plastic handbasket and walked through the cold grocery aisles with the cold mathematical precision of an accountant. I was calculating the exact caloric needs and nutritional requirements for a single adult female for a span of exactly 3 days. I picked up a small, vacuum-sealed package containing a single portion of grilled chicken breast. I selected exactly 3 plastic containers of basic garden salad. I grabbed a small handful of protein bars. Finally, I placed exactly 6 standard plastic bottles of mineral water into my basket. I paid for my extremely meager groceries in cash and drove back to our house in total silence. Down in the basement, hidden completely away from his sight, I dusted off a small, personal-sized thermal cooler. It was the compact kind you might take to a local park, meant to hold just a few sandwiches and a tiny ice pack. I carefully packed my single chicken breast, my small salads, my protein bars, and my 6 bottles of water. I neatly tucked in a single plastic fork and 1 solitary cloth napkin. Then, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the thick roll of bright neon pink tape. I tore off a long, deliberate strip, smoothed it firmly over the hard plastic lid of the tiny cooler, and wrote my name in thick, bold, undeniable black letters. I slid the tiny cooler into the trunk of my car, ready for the airport the next morning. The dramatic irony of the situation was intoxicating, a heavy pressure building in the air. Carter was currently upstairs in our massive bedroom, carefully folding his expensive cashmere sweaters and practicing his grand, visionary speeches for the vice president role in the mirror. He was completely unaware that he was marching confidently toward a massive, catastrophic void. He had promised a 5-star culinary masterpiece to the most powerful woman in his entire industry, and the only food making the trip to the snowy peaks of Aspen was resting quietly inside a neon-labeled plastic box built for one. The storm was no longer gathering. It was already here, and he was walking right into the absolute center of it. Late Friday afternoon, the massive black luxury SUV carrying Carter, the formidable female chief executive officer named Sarah, and 4 other senior executives finally crawled up the steep, ice-slicked mountain roads of Aspen. The journey had been utterly exhausting. A turbulent 3-hour private flight had been immediately followed by an agonizing 2-hour drive through heavy, blinding snowdrifts. The temperature outside was dropping rapidly into the single digits, and the harsh, biting cold had seeped into the bones of every single person in that vehicle. They were entirely drained, highly irritable, and most importantly, they were absolutely ravenous. All of them were desperately anticipating the lavish, 5-star culinary sanctuary that Carter had spent the last 3 weeks arrogantly bragging about. The corporate rental property was a breathtaking monument to excessive wealth. It was a sprawling, multi-million-dollar wooden chalet featuring towering floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a jagged, frozen valley. As the heavy oak front doors swung open, the group was greeted by the warm, inviting scent of burning pine from a massive stone fireplace in the central living area. The executives practically collapsed into the grand foyer, dropping their heavy leather travel bags and unbuttoning their thick cashmere overcoats. Carter stepped over the threshold like a conquering king returning to his loyal subjects. He was practically vibrating with smug, inflated confidence. He did not bother to check the premises or consult with anyone. He simply assumed the invisible machinery of my labor was operating exactly as it always had. "Right this way, everyone," Carter announced loudly, rubbing his hands together in mock anticipation. His voice echoed off the grand vaulted ceilings. "Leave your bags right there. I know we are all absolutely starving after that brutal flight. I have a magnificent welcome spread waiting for you all in the dining hall. We should have a beautiful arrangement of hot appetizers, premium imported cheeses, and a few bottles of an incredible rare Bordeaux breathing right now. Let us go get a proper drink and warm up." He confidently led the procession of wealthy, powerful, and hungry executives down the long, dimly lit hallway. He marched them straight toward the sprawling, open-concept kitchen and dining area, a massive space designed for elite, professional entertaining. But as they rounded the corner and stepped into the grand room, Carter's booming voice suddenly died in his throat. The grand illusion shattered into a million jagged pieces in a fraction of a second. Instead of a bustling team of hired private chefs, a roaring stove top, or a massive oak table groaning under the weight of an expensive catered feast, they found only me. The spectacular room was completely, devastatingly barren. The sprawling marble countertops were wiped perfectly clean, reflecting nothing but the harsh overhead lights. I was seated peacefully on a tall leather bar stool at the very edge of the enormous kitchen island. I was wearing a thick, comfortable wool sweater, reading a paperback novel, and completely ignoring the grand entrance of the corporate elite. Next to my elbow sat my tiny, inexpensive personal cooler. As they walked in, I slowly lifted a cold, unheated chicken breast sandwich on plain whole wheat bread to my mouth and took a quiet, deliberate bite. The group of executives halted abruptly in the doorway. A profound, heavy wave of confusion washed over the tired executives. Sarah, the chief executive officer, furrowed her brow, her sharp eyes darting from my sad little sandwich to the completely empty marble counters, and then finally to Carter. Carter's face had suddenly lost all of its color. He looked like a man who had just stepped out of an airplane and realized he forgot his parachute. He stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes, silently begging me to magically produce a banquet from behind the counter. I simply chewed my cold chicken, turned a page in my book, and offered absolutely nothing. The awkwardness hung so thick in the air it was practically choking them. One of the senior directors, a tall, imposing man who was clearly desperate to break the suffocating tension and desperately thirsty from the altitude, forced a loud, booming laugh that sounded entirely unnatural. "Well," the director said, clapping his hands together awkwardly, "let us at least get some drinks poured while we figure out where the main event is hiding. I could use a tall glass of water." He strode purposefully past Carter, walking straight toward the enormous, commercial-grade stainless steel Sub-Zero refrigerator built into the back wall of the kitchen. It was the kind of massive appliance designed to hold enough food to feed a small army for a month. The director grasped the thick, heavy metal handle and pulled the massive doors wide open. The sudden rush of frigid air swept outward, accompanied by the brilliant, blinding glare of the interior LED lights, illuminating the massive space. The director stopped completely dead in his tracks. He did not reach for a bottle. He did not speak. He just stood there, paralyzed, staring into the bright, echoing cavern. The enormous refrigerator was a wasteland of absolute sterile emptiness. There were no wooden crates of wine. There were no platters of cured meats. There was no sparkling water, no artisan butter, no fresh produce. It was 72 cubic feet of expensive, refrigerated nothingness. Except for one single item, right in the dead center of the primary glass shelf. Illuminated perfectly like a tragic, solitary museum exhibit, sat a single, small plastic container. Across the lid of the container was a thick strip of bright neon pink tape. Written across the tape in thick, bright red permanent marker, in neat, undeniable capital letters, were the exact words, "Noel's Food." Please do not touch. The director slowly backed away from the open refrigerator, his hand slipping limply off the heavy metal handle. The massive doors remained wide open, spilling harsh, cold light into the rapidly darkening room. The atmosphere in the sprawling kitchen instantly calcified. The air grew so thick with sheer, unadulterated humiliation that it was difficult to draw a breath. Sarah took a slow, stunned step forward, her eyes locked on the pathetic red warning label glowing in the center of the empty void. Nobody moved. Nobody dared to speak a single word. Carter looked as though the floor had suddenly opened up to swallow him whole. In that profound, freezing, deadlocked silence, the cheerful, crackling pops of the burning firewood in the grand stone hearth suddenly sounded absolutely deafening, echoing through the room like loud, rhythmic gunshots ringing out across a lonely graveyard. Carter's face underwent a horrifying, spectacular transformation. The smug, polished mask of a victorious corporate titan melted away in a matter of seconds, replaced entirely by stark, unadulterated panic. The blood completely drained from his cheeks, leaving him the color of old parchment. His eyes darted wildly around the sprawling, empty kitchen, as if hoping a team of caterers would suddenly leap out from behind the mahogany cabinets. When the brutal reality finally registered, his panic rapidly curdled into desperate rage. He marched over to my stool, his chest heaving under his expensive wool coat. Without a single word of apology to his stunned colleagues, he clamped his hand around my upper arm and practically dragged me out of the kitchen, pulling me roughly around the corner into the shadowed privacy of the long hallway. He backed me against the expensive textured wallpaper, his face inches from mine. His breath was shallow and rapid. When he spoke, his voice was a frantic, venomous hiss squeezed tightly through his clenched teeth. "Where is the food?" he demanded frantically. "Where are my Wagyu beef and truffle wine? Where is the catering team? What have you done?" I did not flinch. I did not shrink away from his towering frame, nor did I lower my voice to protect his fragile ego as I had done for the past 5 years. Instead, I took a calm, deep breath and projected my voice. I spoke at a volume perfectly calibrated to carry straight down the hallway, echoing sharply off the vaulted ceilings, ensuring that every single syllable would reach the ears of the highly attentive board of directors standing in the kitchen. "I am buying my own food, just as you ordered," I replied smoothly and clearly, my tone as polite as a customer service representative. I assumed a successful man who does not want anyone living off him would have already taken care of his own share and his boss's. The silence that followed my declaration was absolute and crushing. The sound of a heavy wool scarf dropping to the wooden floor in the kitchen sounded like an explosion. Carter stood frozen, his jaw completely unhinged. Before he could even attempt to stammer out a pathetic lie to save face, a shrill, piercing noise shattered the quiet. It was the loud, synchronized blaring of emergency alert sirens ringing from 6 different smartphones in the kitchen, followed immediately by Carter's own phone buzzing violently in his coat pocket. We all walked slowly back into the main room. The tall, imposing director, who had opened the empty refrigerator, was staring at his bright screen with a look of pure dread. "Massive winter storm warning," the director read aloud, his voice flat and defeated. "Total whiteout conditions. They just activated the emergency sirens in the valley." As if on cue, the towering floor-to-ceiling windows rattled violently as a ferocious gust of wind slammed against the heavy glass. The picturesque, gentle snowfall had suddenly transformed into an apocalyptic blizzard. Thick, blinding sheets of white snow whipped through the air, completely erasing the view of the jagged mountains and the steep, winding road below. "The alert says the main highway leading down into the town of Aspen is completely barricaded and locked down by the local authorities," the director continued, looking up from his phone. "Zero visibility. No plows are running until tomorrow morning. We are entirely snowed in." Carter grabbed his own phone, his hands shaking so violently he could barely unlock the screen. He desperately opened every premium food delivery application he had. Nothing. He tried calling a local private concierge service. A pre-recorded message informed him that all drivers were grounded due to the state of emergency. Driving down the treacherous, ice-slicked mountain in their heavy rental vehicle was an absolute suicide mission. Ordering outside food was impossible. There was no escape. Sarah, the powerful female chief executive officer, stepped slowly away from the group. She walked directly toward Carter, her expensive leather boots clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. She had heard every single word of my explanation in the hallway. She looked at the neon pink tape glaring from the refrigerator. She looked at my small plastic cooler, and finally, she looked at the trembling, pathetic man standing before her. The transformation in her eyes was a masterclass in silent execution. The initial shock and disappointment dissolved, hardening into a look of profound, unshakable contempt. She was a woman who commanded thousands of employees and managed billion-dollar budgets. She recognized incompetence instantly, but what she was looking at now was something far worse. She was looking at a fraud. She was looking at a man who claimed credit for a woman's invisible labor, a man so breathtakingly arrogant and thoroughly helpless that he could not even secure a single meal for his superiors. A five-star culinary experience, Carter? Sarah asked softly. Her voice lacked any anger, which made it infinitely more terrifying. It was the icy tone of a judge delivering a final verdict. Is this your definition of executive leadership? Carter opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. No one could save the situation. The reality settled heavily over the room. There were 6 highly influential, incredibly wealthy corporate leaders entirely trapped inside a multi-million-dollar luxury fortress, and their stomachs were aggressively growling. The extravagant wealth surrounding them was suddenly completely useless. The starvation of Carter's massive ego was a slow, agonizing spectacle to witness, with no other options remaining. The man who had promised Wagyu beef and rare truffles was forced to endure the ultimate humiliation. He had to beg, his face burning with a fiery, shameful red. Carter spent the next hour awkwardly approaching his furious, exhausted colleagues one by one. He had to humbly ask them to put their heavy coats back on, brave the freezing garage, and rummage through the dark interiors of their rental vehicles to gather whatever scraps they could find. They scavenged like desperate survivors. The grand, highly anticipated executive dinner was eventually served on the massive, gleaming marble island. It consisted of 3 crushed energy bars, 2 crumpled bags of dry airline peanuts, a half-empty roll of lint-covered breath mints found at the bottom of a briefcase, and 1 large, shiny plastic bag of tough, overly salty teriyaki beef jerky purchased from a gas station on the drive up the mountain. Carter stood at the head of the kitchen island, staring down at the sad, pathetic pile of processed junk food, illuminated by the expensive crystal chandelier above. His perfectly tailored suit felt like a clown costume. The utter devastation in his eyes was absolute. His grand, carefully constructed illusion had been entirely demolished, leaving nothing behind but the hollow, incompetent reality of the man he truly was. The rest of the evening devolved into the most pathetic corporate dinner in the history of the firm. The 6 executives sat around the grand mahogany dining table, passing around a plastic bag of tough beef jerky and tiny, salted airline peanuts. I did not join their grim circle. I sat comfortably at the far end of the room, calmly opening my neon-labeled cooler. I ate my crisp, fresh garden salad and perfectly seasoned grilled chicken breast. The sound of my fork touching the plastic container seemed to echo off the walls. Carter kept his head bowed, unable to meet anyone's eye. Halfway through the miserable meal, Sarah stood up and walked over to my corner. She looked down at my neat, nutritious portion. "Noelle," Sarah said softly, her voice carrying a heavy exhaustion. "May I please have half a bottle of your mineral water?" I nodded gracefully, unscrewed the cap of a fresh bottle, and poured exactly half of it into her empty glass. As I handed it back to her, our eyes locked. No further words were necessary. In that brief, silent exchange, 2 women shared a profound, absolute understanding. She saw exactly what I had endured, and she fully respected the ruthless boundary I had finally drawn. By 8 o'clock the following morning, the violent blizzard had finally passed, replaced by a blinding, brilliant winter sun reflecting off the deep snow. The plows had cleared the main highway. The executives were already packing their bags to flee the disastrous retreat. Carter cornered Sarah near the grand stone fireplace, frantically attempting to salvage his ruined reputation with hollow corporate apologies and promises of future excellence. Sarah held up one single, gloved hand, instantly silencing him. Her voice was as cold and sharp as the icicles hanging from the roof. "Save your breath, Carter," she stated flatly. A man who cannot even manage the logistics of a single weekend meal for his team is utterly useless to me. Furthermore, a man who behaves with such appalling arrogance, who secretly relies on the unpaid labor of his wife to build his own image, and then publicly dismisses her, will never possess the character required to sit in the vice president chair. You are permanently disqualified from consideration. We will discuss your current standing at the firm on Monday. The destruction of his career and his carefully curated reputation was absolute. It happened overnight. As Sarah walked out the front door, Carter finally understood the truth. Every ounce of his past glory, every successful networking event, every promotion he had ever secured, was built entirely on the invisible foundation of my daily sacrifices. The journey back to Seattle was agonizingly silent. The moment we stepped through the front door of our pristine house, the last remaining fragments of Carter's ego completely shattered. He dropped his expensive leather bag and collapsed onto his knees in the foyer. The arrogant corporate titan was gone, replaced by a sobbing, desperate man. "I am so sorry, Noelle," he cried, his voice cracking as he reached out to grasp the hem of my coat. "I see it now. I see everything you did. I will change. I swear to you. I will give you full control of every single bank account. Just please, give me one more chance. Do not leave me." I did not raise my voice. I did not hurl insults. And I certainly did not stay to listen to his hollow, panicked promises. I calmly pulled my coat out of his desperate grip and walked over to the sleek entryway table. I reached into my purse and slid a thick manila envelope across the polished wood, letting it stop right in front of his tear-stained face. With shaking hands, he opened the flap. Inside rested a pristine set of divorce papers, completely filled out and legally signed by me exactly 3 weeks ago. Attached to the back of the legal documents was a meticulously bound, 50-page spreadsheet. It was the ultimate audit. I had detailed every single cent, totaling tens of thousands of dollars, that I had spent subsidizing his lavish, unearned lifestyle over the past 5 years. The dry cleaning, the artisanal coffee, the catered lunches, it was all there, permanently documented. I picked up the handle of the small suitcase I had secretly packed days ago. I opened the front door and walked out into the cool, gray Seattle afternoon, leaving him kneeling on the floor of a massive house that suddenly felt incredibly empty. Later, I pictured him wandering aimlessly into the kitchen, entirely alone, when he would finally open the massive stainless steel refrigerator, hoping to find some small comfort. He would find nothing but bare shelves. In the corner, sitting exactly where he had left it weeks ago, would be the single carton of milk he had purchased himself. It would be bloated, expired, and reeking of sour rot. A perfect, putrid monument to his own arrogance. It was the absolute, flawless end to our marriage. Thank you so much for listening to this story today. Please let me know in the comments where in the world you are tuning in from right now. If you found today's story captivating and satisfying, I have a very important request. As I mentioned at the beginning, our channel will sadly not be uploading any new videos here in the near future because YouTube has completely demonetized us. We must transition our operations entirely to Patreon to survive. Please help us keep these stories alive by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon community. There, you can listen to the absolute best, longest, and most exclusive true stories that we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can easily join us right now by scanning the QR code currently on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link located in the description or the pinned comment below. Thank you again for your incredible support, and take care.